and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Schmidt with LEAF, Wisconsin's K-12 forestry education program. LEAF is part of the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education in the College of Natural Resources at UW-Stevens Point. LEAF is recording this presentation to post on the WCEE's YouTube channel for those of you who could not make it to the live event, or for any of you educators who would like to share with multiple classes. For those of you less familiar with LEAF, our jobs are to connect you as educators with quality forestry education materials. Part of that job is to connect you with the resource professionals who are the experts. That's why we're here today. LEAF is a partnership between the Wisconsin DNR Division of Forestry and the Wisconsin Center for Environmental Education. We have other LEAF staff here on the call, so please introduce yourselves, LEAF staff.
Hi, I'm Nicole Filizetti. I work with LEAF and Project Learning Tree to coordinate professional development.
And my name's Kate Flick, and I do outreach education for K-12 educators and connect with forestry professionals to sort of fuse those two worlds together.
Here's a more detailed list of our offerings and services. We offer professional development for educators, school staff, in-service trainings and workshops and development like this. Curriculum materials, which are free to download. The website is down below, but if you are just ever Googling, if you just Google LEAF UWSP, you can get to it from there. We have hands-on forestry education kits, and we also support outdoor classrooms with the School Forest program in Wisconsin and Project Learning Tree. During today's presentation, please feel free to put questions in the chat at any time. Some questions will be answered during the presentation, and there will be a pause somewhere in the middle to provide that opportunity to unmute and ask some questions potentially as well. If we don't get to a question during the presentation, there will be time after for Q&A, or you can email us as well and with some follow-up. With that, welcome to our speaker, Brian Wall, Urban Forestry Specialist with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Thanks for joining us today, Brian.
Thanks for having me. 1 second here, and I will get a screen shared. All right, how's that looking? Good? Excellent. Well, hello, my name is Brian Wall. I'm an urban and community forester with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Basically, my job is to work with communities, nonprofits, and the arboriculture industry to help them manage the urban forest. And I do that through technical assistance, grants, and through educational opportunities such as this. And I need to move all you people off my notes so I can refer to them during this presentation. Okay, so today I am supposed to talk to you all about urban and community forester. And I gotta tell you, I just don't have that much time. It's not gonna be all, we'll talk a little bit. But I have provided LEAF here with a list of resources and lessons for you, or at least links to lessons that pretty much cover more detail about every subject that I'm gonna talk about today. So that'll be made available to you at some point. And of course, always feel free to reach out either to me or to one of your local coordinators if you need some more information. All right, with that, let me see here. All right, so thank you. No, this is not the end already. You couldn't be so lucky, but I wanted to thank you teachers up front for giving your time to learn with me today. And I want to thank you for teaching our kids. You have an amazingly tough job, and I appreciate all you do every year, and especially this past year. You've had a crazy amount of different challenges and things to deal with. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we'll get started. So what is an urban forest? Well, technically speaking, the urban forest is an ecosystem containing all of the trees, plants, associated animals in the urban environment, both in and around communities. And by communities, I mean municipalities, including townships, towns, villages, and cities. You know, many people often think that the urban forestry are just parks and natural areas in our municipalities, but it also includes the trees along our streets, in our downtowns, our parking lots, and in our yards. Urban forests form the green infrastructure on which our communities depend. Now, when some people hear the word urban, they start to tune out, and I get it, because urban isn't a term that really relates to a lot of people in Wisconsin. We think of ourselves as more of a rural state. And that's kind of why I like to use the title urban and community forestry, because for me, urban forestry is wherever you have these three things, where you have trees, infrastructure, and people all interacting. So the urban forest is not just Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, and Eau Claire. It's also places like Spooner, Phillips, and Lancaster. It's the forest that's outside your door. And do you know that the US has over 140 million acres of urban forest canopy? And that's according to the technical definition. In Wisconsin, we're right around 2.5 million acres of urban forest, which according to one of our DNR studies, puts us at about 42 million urban trees to take care of and manage. Now, as you can see on my graph up here, the public, and that's mainly local governments, really control only about 15 to 20% of those trees. On average, 80 to 85% of that canopy is directly controlled by you and the choices you make. That means 30 plus million trees in Wisconsin are in your hands. And with over 80% of the US population now living in urban areas, and depending on those benefits from our urban trees, urban forest management is now more critical than ever. So what is urban forestry? Well, again, the nice technical definition is it's the practical application of arboriculture, which is tree care, pruning, planting, treatments, removal, all those things to manage a population of trees in our cities, towns, villages, etc. And the scale, well, that depends. It could be on a citywide scale, a regional scale. It could be a park. And yep, it could be your yard or the street out in front of your home. Goals for urban forestry can vary, but ultimately we want to maximize the benefits that trees can give us while reducing risk and keeping costs in line. Unfortunately, we can't just plant trees and hope things are going to be okay. Our forests need to be actively managed. And to some degree, this looks remarkably similar to what our traditional foresters do. Some examples include plantings. You know, you can see here on the, I'm going to mess up my left and right, but on the left side of the screen is traditional forestry. They do a lot of planting of seedlings and a lot of it by hand, and they do thousands and thousands at a time. On the right side, we have urban forestry. We definitely don't plant thousands and thousands at a time. Our planting stock tends to be bigger. And, you know, we do that because survivability rates, people like instant shade, and we can't wait for seedlings. Some other similarities include harvest and removals. Yep, we remove trees too, just like they do in traditional forestry. Of course, our methods are typically different. We often use climbers and we use a lot of rigging, which are the ropes and pulleys. We also use lifts and backyard cranes, if you can believe it. But you can see here too, up in the corner, traditional forestry has the apprentice loader cutting down trees. And now in the urban forest, we're using very similar things to remove trees as well. In addition, we need to manage for wildlife benefits, and to mitigate wildlife damage. Benefits such as, you know, urban forestries provide pollen sources for bees, nesting sites for birds, etc. But we have damage issues as well. Deer being a big one, right? It's Wisconsin, right? On one side, we can see here deer browse in a traditional planting. And on the other side, we can see buck rub on a bunch of newly planted trees in the urban environment. But we are also managing for voles, moles, sapsuckers, squirrels, and even dogs. Other similarities we deal with, traditional forestry and urban forestry are all dealing with the same bad guys. The invasive species such as buckthorn, emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, things like gypsy moth and oak wilt. We tend to treat more on a single tree basis rather than on a stand of trees, but we do things like aerial spraying as well. Another similarity is we use data. Canopy analysis, aerial photos, and other digital technology. And part of that is we need to have a snapshot of what our forests look like, both in the traditional forestry and in urban forestry. We need to know what we have and where it is. In addition, our communities use things like direct inventories where we're touching every tree. and management plans to help guide their actions to best utilize the resource. And speaking of inventories, I need to show you this really cool tool that we have. Inventories are super important for our communities. In fact, when we do our grant fundings, most often we start with an inventory for community. And that's because you can't have good management if you don't know what you have. Again, you need to know what you have to be able to manage it well. Well, we have this really great tool called the Wisconsin Community Tree Map. It contains data from the last 5 years or so for every community that we've paid for an inventory with our grant dollars. Also, some communities have volunteered their information. Currently, we are representing about 1 million trees. So not all the trees out there, but it gives us at least a snapshot, a little bit finer scale to help us know where the trees are, where they're at, and how they're doing. It also helps communities and the public see this because this is available to everyone to look at. It helps informs decisions and policymaking statewide. One thing to notice or consider here, especially on this one, so this is Phillips, little town in northern Wisconsin. Actually, their high school students did the inventory for the community. I think that's fantastic. But if you look here on the side, one of the things you can do is dig down into the data for ecosystem services, species composition, distribution. And you can see here, this one is showing, I think maybe you guys can see my mouse. Let me bring that up here. Over here on this corner, this little graph, it's showing species composition. And one thing I want to point out here, and this is something you can do with your students too, is compare different communities, is in the industry, we really like to hold communities to the 5, 10, 15 rule as far as diversity is concerned. That's plant no more than 5% of one species, 10% of one genus, or 20% of one family. So if we think about it in terms of ash, let's do that here. We've got green ash. Green ash is a species, ash representing the genus. And here we've got 15%. So are they meeting the rule? Yeah, they'd be right here as long as they don't have any other ash planted. And this is only really showing the top 10. But let's look at maple here real quick. They've got red maple, silver maple, and sugar maple. And if we add those all up, we've got, I think, 4 here, 8 here, and 10 here. So we're well over 20%, and that's just in the genus for maple, let alone the family. So again, that's something that this kind of data can help us sort out and help us manage our forests. Real quick, what's the most commonly planted tree or genus in Wisconsin? You guessed it, maple. Statewide, we're looking at over, actually close to 40% of our communities are planted, and those are just the public trees in maple. And you can imagine that can cause some serious issues as far as resiliency for our urban canopy. And that, again, is only the public trees. If you consider private trees as well, I would estimate we're probably up to 75% or so, especially if you look in people's backyards. A lot of silver maples out there. So what does that mean when Arbor Day comes around this year? Maybe choose something besides maple. Now, I did mention this is a tool that anybody can use and look at, but here's a really cool hint. If you take a leaf course, you can actually access the Wisconsin the Wisconsin Community Tree Map, and you'll be able to get an account in which you can do an inventory on your own school property and actually add your data to our cumulative map, as well as run all the different comparisons, which you can do the comparisons without taking the leaf course, but to have all the fun, you need to take the leaf course. There's my shameless plug. All right, moving on. Of course, we do have some differences between traditional and urban forestry. In fact, there are many differences, but it really does come down to a couple big ones: infrastructure, scale, and people. And when I say people, both their influence directly on the forest, indirectly on the forest, and their values. People value urban trees differently. Let me just quick talk about, let me do time check here. All right, you would think my phone would stay on. There we go. Soil is a big one. I just want to mention this one because there are no native urban soils. Check your soil manual. Urban isn't in there. In a typical development, the first thing we do is strip off all the topsoil, and then we drive a bunch of equipment around it, put up houses, and then maybe in the best case scenario, we'll bring back some inches of topsoil and expect you to grow trees in it. Typically though, we get less than that. We get compacted construction debris that just isn't a great place to grow trees. So these are some of the challenges that we need to deal with, where traditional forestry doesn't really need to. The other thing is soil volume. When we're talking about between the sidewalk and the curb or downtown 4x4 cutouts, not a lot of soil there, yet we're asking trees to grow there. The other thing is scale. On your woodlot, and I talked about this a little bit with planting before, you might pay $1 or $2 for a seedling and plant thousands in a day. Your community, however, may plant 10, 15, or 25 in a year, and it might take them a couple days, and it's going to probably cost thousands of dollars. So there's a different scale that we're dealing with in the urban environment. And to implement a lot of our management plans, we are often applying treatments to single trees. Whether that's emerald ash borer treatment, whether we're pruning with a handsaw, or other things like that. I mean, have you ever seen somebody manage a traditional woodlot with a hand pruners or a handsaw? I don't think so. And of course, value. I alluded to this a little bit before. And this might give you some example. If you cut a tree in someone else's woods, you could potentially be sued for the value of that tree. And a typical tree, I don't know, I'm just throwing out here, like 12 inches in diameter, might be worth $20 timber value. You can get sued treble damages and plus trespassing. So yeah, maybe a couple $100 in, hopefully I'm not encouraging criminal activity here. But if you were to cut down a similar sized tree in somebody's front yard, you could be looking at fines or being sued for thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. The point is here, again, not to encourage criminal behavior. The point is that people place a higher value on those trees that are near where they live because of all the great benefits that they provide us. Okay, so what are some of those benefits? And why is it so important to manage for them? Well, as you probably already know, the urban forests offer us countless social, economic, and environmental benefits. I'm sure you've already discussed many, or many right off the top of your head. I do want to say, though, a 2012 study with the U.S. Forest Service found that trees in and immediately surrounding Wisconsin urban areas provide annual energy savings to residents to the tune of about $79 million. They remove about $47 million worth of air pollution and store about $507 million worth of carbon. I know, lots of big numbers throwing out there. But the thing is to imagine or to remind yourself that trees are our original green infrastructure, and they are the only municipal asset that appreciates in value over time. Let's see a fire truck do that. They are a solid investment. For every dollar that we spend on trees and tree care, tree management, we can get up to $3 in benefits and back. And that's in property value, these energy savings, the pollution, the stormwater mitigation, the heat island mitigation, effect mitigation. But it doesn't even start to include all the tree health benefits that are out there. And again, on this screen, you can see a lot of the things that are out there that we're familiar with, like the pollution and stuff like that. But trees, as this one article points out, trees mean business. Trees attract businesses to downtown areas. They attract tourists, they attract dollars. People spend more time, travel farther, and spend more money on a similar product in a treescape downtown area than they do, say, out at the mega mall. So trees bring economic value, urban trees. And I'm sorry, I was mentioning health here, and so maybe I should stick with that. But one thing that we've realized over COVID, it's kind of hit us in the face, that getting out to these green spaces, having access to green spaces, being able to see green spaces has been a boon and a benefit that few have realized in the past. But we know, and there's data out there that show that having a view and being able to experience trees is related to reductions in stress, anxiety, lower blood pressure, reduced chronic heart disease, faster recovery times from surgery, reduced needs for pain meds, fewer sick days called in, increased birth weight, and more. They've calculated some of the, and again, not for all these studies, but for a lot of these health studies, they've totaled them up, and it's over 11 billion in avoided healthcare costs nationwide every year. Are trees worth managing? I think so. And real quick, down at the bottom of the screen here, you can see that Green Cities Good Health. Check out that website. It's also provided in the resources for more benefits and the research that's associated with them. All right, and of course, I can't miss schools. I put this one out here because I don't have this one in the resources. It's the childrenandnaturenetwork.org. They have a lot of great infographics that are specifically geared towards tree benefits and nature benefits to school children. And just real quick, the bottom one here, room with a view. High school students that study there, so directly applying to all of you. Higher standardized test scores, higher graduation rates, fewer occurrences of criminal behavior. When students have view of trees outside their window, that's a view. And that's in contrast to, say, something like large lawns. So it's not just green, it's trees. All right, and I was told to promise you some activities or things that you can do in your classroom. So real quick, here are a couple things. Again, you can check out in the resources. One of those is our urban tree ID key. That's going to help you with things if you want to do the Wisconsin community tree map. You're going to need to be able to ID your trees, or just have your kids walk around your school and ID trees that way. A great thing to do for Arbor Day is the middle one here. Vibrant Cities Labs has this, so do a couple other people, but you can print out value or price tags or even nutritional labels for trees and the benefits they can provide you for a year. In some cases, they allow you to estimate the time over the lifespan of the tree, like this one does with the $13,298. That's a lot. iTree Design allows you to take your school or your home and to figure out where to plant trees, or if you have trees, what benefits they're already giving you. So just some cool things you can access. And again, those resources are available on that list. So who does all the work to manage these trees and keep our forests healthy? Well, hopefully someday it's you. Municipal forestry is done by a lot of folks. Sometimes they have a forester, but often it's the public works or parks and rec directors that I work with, city planners too. They're making decisions for the trees. And work is typically carried out by city staff, or it's contracted out. But in the industry, there's sort of the commercial side. They tend to take care of what we consider industrial campuses, golf courses, corporate campuses, and places like Disney World. Who wouldn't want to work there? Then there's the private tree care industry, and those are the folks who are going to be doing tree work in your yard. There are so many roles that you can find in this industry. Do you like to climb trees? Do you like to solve problems and diagnose disease? Do you like planning, organizing, and coordinating projects? Do you like educating clients and making sales? Well, if you do, we've got a job for you. And I do want to state heavily that urban forestry is not all about climbing. While it is super fun, it's not for everyone. But as I mentioned before, there is a role for everyone. If you look at the screen that I have up here, I also want to point out that, yep, arboriculture does tend to be a male-dominated field, but that is changing. And some of the best climbers out there are women. And I just want to point out on my slide here that Martin, she's sponsored by Husqvarna. She's one of the tree world-class tree champions. So there you go. There's a role and room for everyone. If you want to stay on the ground and you're afraid of heights like I am, I climb trees. Trees kind of give you a sense of comfort. Big elms with no limbs, it's a different story. But anyway, there are jobs for you as well. Down here in the bottom, I think my mouse works, right? So this guy here, he's a shrub and ornamental tree specialist, right? So he never gets off the ground. He uses pole saw, hand pruners, and hand saws. Over here, this is showing a crane removal. We've got equipment operators, whether it's skid steers, front end loaders, backyard lifts, spider lifts, or cranes, there's a job for you. Down here, we're looking at, this is our plant healthcare technician. Plant healthcare technicians deal with disease diagnosis and treatment. Did you know you give trees injections? We do it all the time. There's also urban forestry inventory specialists who go and do inventories for communities and for private estates. There's consulting foresters and research foresters. This gentleman here is from Madison, Wisconsin. That's Bruce Allison. And what they're doing here with these little instruments is they are using basically sonar to detect decay in trees. So there's a lot of cool things that are going out there. And this is just a little image of the pocket of decay that's in that tree. So some cool stuff out there. All right. So again, this is just a small portion of the roles that are out there. And I want to also state that in Wisconsin, actually nationwide, arboriculture is experiencing growth. There's an outlook of an increase of 8% in this field specifically in Wisconsin, but nationwide, you're in demand. If you want to work with trees, people are looking to hire you. It's also one of the businesses that didn't stop during COVID. And in many of those companies out there experienced growth because people were sitting at home looking at their trees going, ooh, they may need some TLC. So just some of those things to consider as you move forward. A really cool tool that you can use either in your classroom or just exploring by yourself. At the ISA, the International Society of Arboriculture, they have this really great career sheet, which lists a bunch of different, and not all the jobs that are out there, but a bunch of different career paths. And as you click on the career path, in this case, it's commercial climber, it brings up information about what you do. You know, what skills do you need? You know, where can you go to learn? So that's a really fun and great tool that you can use, also on that list of resources I provided. All righty, and moving on, how do you get there? There are so many ways into this field. It's one of the things that we've tried to do working with the Department of Workforce Development to make this career as accessible as possible. And that also helps our industry folks fill those positions that they so desperately need to fill. One thing I want to, shout out to folks high school level is youth apprenticeship. Now, youth apprenticeship isn't available right now, but we're shooting for fall that there will be an arborist youth apprenticeship. So look for that because the best way to figure out whether or not this is a field you want to be in is to experience it. There's both a 1- and 2-year track that'll be out there for high school folks. Again, hopefully this fall. The other thing that we've been working really hard on is a registered apprenticeship for arborists here in Wisconsin. This is now, we have a program. It means that arboriculture is recognized as a skilled trade with the Department of Labor, both here in Wisconsin, but also nationally. So if you go through an apprenticeship and get an apprentice card, you are an apprentice in any state that you happen to move to. Apprenticeship is pretty great because you earn while you learn. 90% of it is on-the-job training, and 10% of your time is spent in paid-related instruction. The program lasts approximately 3 years, but that depends on your situation. The other thing I want to point out here in the middle category is we have a bunch of 2-year institutions in Wisconsin that offer 2-year associate degrees in urban forestry. The other cool thing is if you participate in one of those programs, they often are linked in 2+2 programming, which means go for 2 years at the 2-year program and you can bounce up and transfer all of those credits in that degree program to a 4-year program, which are the institutes here on the far right. Stevens Point being probably the most popular one, but Madison also has a program, so does Green Bay. So those are just some cool things to keep in mind. Another thing I want to point out too, like not all the 2-year programs operate the same. For example, some of these operate kind of like on your regular school schedule basis. Madison Area Technical College, when they started, they wanted to make it so that you could still work while you learned. So a lot of it is scheduled around the workday. And they've got employers that know that there will be like 1 or 2 days a week that their employee may be at school, but the rest of the time they're available to work. So that's kind of a cool twist on a program. So just a shout out there. And there are more programs than this. I don't have a slide big enough. All right, so this is just my reminder to take a break and see if there's any questions before we head into the last stretch. I don't know, you can't really see it, it's a little blurry, but it says, sometimes I feel so drained. It is, well, Maple Sugaring Time's just about up.
Hi, Brian. I have a question. In comments, I just wanted to address the comment, and I had the same question as far as the youth apprenticeship program. Is that through the WDNR, or can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, so apprenticeship programs are not run through the DNR. Youth apprenticeship, typically there's a youth apprenticeship coordinator in each school district. And so they would be the ones to help facilitate those connections to local businesses. And typically that's how those work. There are either businesses who are already signed up, although in this case, being it a new program, they won't have anybody probably lined up yet. But if there's a, for example, a landscaping or a arboriculture or urban forestry company, maybe even the community itself would be willing to take on an apprentice. They work with the youth apprentice coordinator, the student, and the business to make those relationships happen.
Thank you.
Yep, good question.
Ryan, there was also, I'm not sure if this question was put in the chat before you mentioned urban soils, but Kate asked if there were any urban soil identification guides or codes like Mollisol, Alphasol, et cetera.
Yep, there's one, J-U-N-K. No, I'm kidding. No, as far as I know, there are no urban soil typing at all. Because again, it's just a mishmash that's out there. Every time we dig a hole or drive over it, we mess it up. So you can imagine that happens all the time. I know a graduate student at UWSP was working on urban soils, Bryant Scherenbrock, one of the professors there. Also, I guess is an urban soil specialist. But they would be the folks to really dig into that with. No pun intended. Not me. I don't know.
Cool.
Thank you.
I was going to say too, your J-U-N-K. Yeah, I was laughing hard at that one, but I was on mute. So good joke.
Yeah, that got a chuckle out of me as well. I have a question, Brian, about the picture of the person giving a shot to a tree. How does that work? Can you describe how that process works?
Well, there's a bunch of different ways you can give a shot to a tree, or at least get medication into a tree. Some of those are soil injections, where you simply are putting the injection right into the ground next to the root and allowing the root to take up the soil injection just as it would water or nutrients. Other times you directly can take an instrument and jab it into the tree where the needle tip, so to speak, gets into the cambial layer, which is the transportation circulatory system of the tree. And you can put it directly in that way. Other times you need to drill the tree first and add a few more steps and apparatus to get that injection where it needs to go. And sometimes you can just spray it right on the bark and the bark will absorb it. So there's a couple different ways to give a tree an injection.
Oh, and so if somebody is choosing to try to fight off emerald ash borer with a tree they have, that's the way that it would go?
Yep, actually there are a variety of formulations that each one of those has an emerald ash borer treatment. Every one that I described, there's one out there that can be applied differently.
Thanks.
Yep. And just on the note of emerald ash borer, I'm not going to talk about emerald ash borer today because I'm guessing when you tune into the Forest Health one, they will.
Thanks, Brian. I don't see anything else in the chat at this time.
Okay, what's my time check?
12:34. You're doing well.
What does that mean for time? Left. Okay. Well, be that as it may. All right. So I have a question for you guys. How long does the average downtown tree live? Now, I know this isn't super interactive, so just put a number in your head and we're going to move on here. It is, well, actually, I'll answer that here. It's 7 years. 7 years on average. Do you think a tree in 7 years can provide us with all those great benefits we talked about? Flat answer is no. Now, as we move away from the concrete and get further and further out from the downtown and into the suburbs, the average tree lives to be about 30 years old. Are we able to get maximum benefits at 30 years? For some tree species, that's just about the time between 20 and 30 years when they really start to pump out those benefits that we're talking about. So the question is, why is that? And is there anything we can do to help these trees survive longer? And the answer is yeah. Let's explore that a little bit further with my top 10 list of tree killers. Now, for those, I need to credit the Late Night with David Letterman. I'm stealing it from them. And to be honest, we don't have time to go in the top 10 list of tree killers, but how about 3? The first one, or number 3, bark damage. And what do I mean by bark damage? I mean when we do things like, okay, this is no longer a tree. This is a fence post. I realize that. Okay, you don't need to point that out. But look at this. Look at this damage here. That was not done by a dog, although it could be. This is weed. This was done by a weed whacker. Now imagine we do this to our mailboxes, but we also do this to our trees. A lot of our trees. Mowers and weed whackers are a top killer of trees in the urban environment. A lot of our small trees suffer from it, but so do some of our big trees. We run out of, this one's not a great picture of roots, but when roots are in our lawn, we tend to run over those with a lawnmower because we think, nah, big deal. Or we scuff trees. This could be with automobiles, this could be with bikes, this could be with snow plows. When you're chaining your bike to a tree, you do have a chance of damaging that cambial tissue. And that is, again, the circulatory system of the tree. So this is a huge problem in urban environments. What can we do about it? Well, there are tree guards you can use, but you need to use them judiciously. They're not always effective. You need to remember to put them on, but you also need to remember to take them off or size them up as the tree grows, which a lot of people forget, and that can also kill the tree. So the best solution is mulch, but not volcano mulch. I see a lot of places piling mulch up against tree trunks, and that is essentially like burying your tree too deep. Trunk tissue belongs above ground, not below ground. When you put mulch up like a volcano, you're essentially putting that trunk tissue below ground. It can invite disease, and it definitely stresses out and can lead to death of the tree. So how do we do this? We want to mulch the right way, and that is no mulch against the tree trunk. Some people recommend a couple inches. Some people recommend up to 6 inches away from the trunk. So I usually do a couple myself, maybe about 3 inches away from the trunk. And then as I move out here, and you can kind of see it here, I have 0 mulch here. I've got 2 inches of mulch about in the middle, and then out to the end about 4 inches. So 2 to 4 inches of mulch is great. What does mulch do besides keep lawnmowers and weed whackers away? Well, it regulates soil temperature, adds organic material, which those urban soils so desperately need, and it reduces grass competition. In fact, underneath mulch, we have 400 times more fine root hair growth than we do under turf. Benefit for the tree? You bet. All right, moving on to number 2. Improper pruning. So I bring this up because these are things that you can do on your school property. You can encourage proper mulching, and you can encourage or maybe even do proper pruning. But improper pruning looks a little scary. Tear outs, flush cuts, and stubs, oh my. Now we don't see too much topping of trees anymore. That's what we see over here in this larger picture, where we just indiscriminately reduce the canopy size by cutting wherever we want. But we do often see a lot of stubs left on trees or tear outs because of improper pruning techniques. This one up here is a flush cut. And basically what a flush cut is, you've ignored the branch and the stem connection, and you've just kind of cut indiscriminately. Not only did you take off the stem up here that you wanted to prune, but the branch you wanted to prune, but you also cut into the stem. And once you do that, or this, you lead to infection, disease, and eventual death of these trees. Not only that, but it also makes them much more storm prone. The other case of improper pruning is the cut that was never taken. As trees are developing, they do need to be pruned. This is where tree, urban forest management and maintenance comes into play. Most of our trees basically grew up or are genetically from the forest, and they are governed by shade, and shade helps keep our trees nice and straight and put branches in appropriate places. When they're grown in our urban environment, they sort of go willy-nilly and do what they want, and they put branches wherever they can get sunlight. And sometimes that's not the best for them, and they can develop really weak structures like this branch juncture here, and that can be pruned off to make it a safer tree. As far as an activity that you can do with your classroom, if you're not allowed to use, or say you don't have a horticultural class or club that can go out and actually do pruning with saws, one thing you can do is what I call marker pruning. And marker pruning, I don't mean that you're going to go out there and just cut up a bunch of markers. I mean that you can have tree samples in your classroom and use a marker to mark where appropriate cuts would be. Where's the branch bark ridge? And again, I'm throwing out some technical terms here, but you can find those in some of the resource links that are under pruning in that resource guide that I provided. But here's just an example on the screen here of some of the things you can do. The other thing, you can do this out on live trees as well, but if the marks don't fade by the next year, you get a limited amount of trees. All right, moving on to number 1, and that is poor planting. This is a huge one. It's especially important with Arbor Day coming up if you're planning on planting a tree. A lot of people don't believe me when I say this because everybody thinks they know how to plant a tree. And if they don't know how to plant a tree, they rely on the directions that are provided with the tree that they buy. And a lot of times those directions are wrong, or at least not complete. So let's take a little look at what we can do about poor planting. the big thing to cover as far as planting, because I know we don't have a ton of time here, is that we want to plant trees and not poles. And what do I mean by that? If we look at this one here with the grass around it, this looks like a pole going into the ground. And if you've got a pole, if you planted a pole going into the ground, you've probably done it wrong. There was a survey done in the 90s, even professionals, like 93% of professionals planted trees incorrectly. We've made a lot of huge strides since then. Even the nurseries are working on getting better stock out to homeowners. But it's still something you need to be very, very, very conscious of. So what do we need to do to plant trees and not poles? Is we need to bear the flare. And I need to thank one of my colleagues for that. It's a great saying, it's very catchy, but the root flare is what we need to see. And that's where the first main order structural roots come out. Not all trees have are they like super easily identifiable, but they're there. Sometimes, as in this picture here, they're buried very deeply. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a ruler. This is part of the ball that it was in. So this isn't the ground itself. But we had to dig down about 12 inches to find that root flare. So had we followed the directions and say planted it just as it is in the bucket or in the ball, planted at the level of the soil, this tree would have been planted 12 inches too deep. And as everybody here knows, bark tissue belongs above ground and not below. And so many of our trees, in fact, about 80% of all tree issues or stressors in the urban environment can be traced back to poor planting practices. This stresses the tree, sets them up for disease, sets them up for insects, et cetera, et cetera. Not only that, oops, I don't know how to go back, but that's okay. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Not only that, this one up here, you'll see this on a lot of trees that have been planted too deeply. This is called girdling roots. This can also happen if you do volcano mulching. These fine roots will find their way up into the volcano mulch as well. And what is this? These are just the roots of the tree surrounding the trunk and essentially choking the tree off itself. Now, roots can graft to roots typically, but roots cannot graft to bark tissue. So these eventually, like I said, will squeeze and kill this tree. It also makes it a very unsafe tree. In a storm, if this gets really weak down here, which it will, it can just topple right over. So just some things to be aware of. Bear the flare when planting your trees. All right, so some more forestry in your schools. One thing I want to bring up is to celebrate Arbor Day. Arbor Day is coming up at the last Friday in April. And some activities that you can do, we've already talked about them, but you can tag some trees with those price tags or value tags or nutritional labels. You can mulch some trees, super easy, you know. You can plant some trees, a little bit more involved, but always very fun. Just remember to bear the flare. One thing that I would encourage you guys to do is look into Tree Campus, the K-12 program. It's not something that we administer here at the DNR. We actually do the Tree City USA and Tree Line USA for utilities and the Tree Campus program for universities. But the Tree Campus K-12 is not us. However, it is also a relatively simple program to do. And really it has 4 requirements like most of the programs. One of them is to have a Tree Campus team. And if you have a green team already or something like that, that can count, okay? They just need to be making decisions and plans for the trees on campus. It says here to have an education plan, and really what that means is to make sure that you are teaching some things about trees. It doesn't have to be a whole curriculum worth, but it has to be some activities and plans. Where can you find those? Ask your friendly leaf staff, they've got tons. Then a hands-on related tree experience. Typically these are service projects. You know, whether or not you are, you know, planting trees on your campus, it could be the tree tags. It could be doing an inventory and management plan in your community or on your campus. Lots of different things can count for that. In fact, there'll be one here on the next slide that I'll show you as well. And then the last but not least, have an Arbor Day observance. Really celebrate Arbor Day. Simple as that. And that can help you become a Tree Campus USA. Another project you can do for that hands-on experience is help your city become a Tree City USA if they're not already. Really, local advocacy is what gets a lot of urban forestry done in Wisconsin. So if it's not you, encourage someone else to be that advocate. All right, and then one last thing. Here's a great project that some of you have already seen if you're a teacher that went to the Ag conference, but this is a great idea. This is a gravel bed nursery. Bare root trees planted in here. You can use this to restock your school. You can use it to restock your community. You can use it as a fundraiser so that we can get some more private canopy out there. Pretty easy setup to do. There's information in the links and resources that I've provided. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. One thing to keep in mind though with the community gravel beds is that water can be expensive. So if you can partner with your community and actually have it on their property and use their water, or if you have well water, it becomes that much more sustainable. All right, and with that, again, my name is Brian Wall. That's my contact information. If you have any questions about what you've heard here today, you need more details, for sure, check out the resource list I provided or get a hold of me.
Thanks, Brian. And I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. There's still a few minutes to add questions to the chat if anyone might have. LEAF is excited to host one more of these excellent DNR guest lectures. And the next one is on May 4th. Mike Hillstrom, who is a forest health specialist with the DNR, is going to be talking on invasive species. And so there's plenty of time to register for that. And just a reminder, this will be, since this was recorded, it'll be on our YouTube page, probably either by the end of the week or on Monday. So with that, any questions? And I know I threw one in the chat that I'm going to pass along to you as well, Brian.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. So when you put up the pictures of the poor pruning practices,
Yes.
It made me think of all the shredding of trees and shrubs along roadways that I'm seeing all over the state. And even I live in Wausau, and I noticed it in my subdivision. So what's going on with that? It seems like even far off the roads, they're shredding these trees, and some of them are bigger than you would expect them to be taken down.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I mean, it's going to depend individual case basis, but typically what that is and what we're seeing a lot of is that whether it's the county, the municipality, or the utility, they're reclaiming their right-of-ways. A lot of that is they're trying to be safer, so they're mowing all of that vegetation back. Yeah, and when you use a power forestry mower like that, proper pruning cuts clearly are not being made. I think in some cases, yeah, they're taking liberties by hitting some trees and taking off limbs with those mowers, which again is not really a proper practice if you want to keep that tree in the environment for as long as it can be. But typically that's what it is. It's a utility or municipality of some sort reclaiming their right of way. And that's, to be honest, it's an efficient way to do that. And the goal there is not to have trees. So is it the proper management for what they want? Probably, because it's the most cost effective, reduces their risk, and meets their end goal, which I want more canopy, but I can understand why they don't that close to the road.
Sure. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those gravel bed root planting things and how schools might be able to set them up. Because I think they'd be a really cool school project. So give us like a how-to 101.
Yeah, a how-to 101, gravel, water, trees. That's all you need, and time. And pretty much what it is literally, I've seen folks dump gravel on the ground, stick bare root trees in it, and provide water. And they usually need to be watered. It depends on how much you're watering, but let's say 2-3 times a day. You need to flood the gravel with water. And then that's it. And what's amazing is these bare root trees that go in there, you've probably seen them at Young's or wherever else, these sort of, whatever, this is what the tree root system looks like. You stick them in these gravel beds, you provide them with water, and in like 6 weeks, you have this giant mop of fine roots. And these trees just tend to do better when they're planted out in the environment because they've got that jump start of having all that fine root growth. We've even had gravel bed in Dane County here, the county has one, it's huge. They even have fruit trees producing fruit the first year while they're in the gravel bed, which is a little crazy, but that just shows you that the fine root growth can, or gravel beds can really deal with transplant shock much quicker than other methods.
Do you
That's
have
kind of cool.
Yeah, do you have to add nutrients to the water at all? Or is that why the fine roots are trying to find nutrients?
No, so this really is what we would call a holding nursery. You're putting trees in there. Yes, you are getting fine root growth. This isn't to grow tops of trees. So your tree, and it's not for long-term storage. Trees can stay in there over, over the winter. That does work. The difficulty is getting those trees out the next year because of all the fine root growth. However, nutrients are not recommended at this time to be added. A couple of our municipalities have toyed with doing that, but most people do not add nutrients.
I have another question, as long as there's a pause. You mentioned briefly that dogs kill trees in towns as well. And I know the place that I have my dog go is out kind of close to the driveway, but there's an oak tree right there too, that a bur oak that I know, he's going a lot around.
Sure. And bur oak trees tend to have a little thicker bark, so they can handle some of that more easily. It's a lot of our new plants that if they become that tree in the neighborhood that every single dog urinates on, yeah, you can get the salts building up in the soil. This is actually a much larger problem in our super urbanized areas in which we have a lot, like thousands of apartment dwellers with dogs. And there's like a handful of trees, and all of those trees get peed on every day by thousands of dogs. There are campaigns in Philadelphia that they have signs. It's a tree pit, not a pee pit, because to encourage dog owners not to use those trees for their dogs to urinate on. But dogs cause other damage, partially human fault, as in we tie our dogs to trees, and their chains can obviously cause some cambial damage. I've had dogs that bite and chew on trees and peel bark. So if you do have a dog and you have thin bark trees in your yard, it might be a good idea to put some protection around them.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? I see that there have been some great resources shared in the chat. And so any of those that aren't on the document that we are sharing, we'll add those or create another one to make sure everybody can access those links following the presentation.
Yeah, and what I'm hoping is what's provided in those resources there. For example, if you want to, teach your kids how to do the marker pruning or planting of trees, there are resources in there that should walk you through that step by step on how you figure out where the proper pruning cuts are. There are also videos on there for those things as well, with experts that are again walking you through that. So hopefully, if you watch all these videos and check out all these resources, you'll be more of an expert than I am. One thing I do want to bring up is with the, because somebody mentioned the youth apprenticeship, I'll bring up the regular apprenticeship. Again, that's a program that I encourage people to check out if you're interested in getting into the field and you want to earn while you learn. The one issue that I would say is out there is that it's not like the carpentry apprenticeship or electrician apprenticeship where they already have companies lined up who are taking apprentices. There are a handful, yes, for sure. There's probably about a dozen or so companies in Wisconsin that are actively seeking apprenticeship or apprentices, but oftentimes you need to seek those out. You have to go to their websites to see, are they hiring an apprentice? Some of them will say and some of them won't. Other times you need to make the first step and say, hey, I'd like to become an apprentice. And typically these employers aren't hiring you as an apprentice. They're gonna hire you. They're gonna check you out, your work ethic out. Are you a good communicator? Are you a good team player? Are you able and willing to do the work? And then after you've worked for them for a short period of time, they will sign you up or join you in an apprenticeship because it is a commitment on their end, both financially and time-wise, as it is on yours. So again, it's going to be something that at this early stage in the game, the apprenticeship program's been out there for about 3-4 years now. You're going to have to do a little bit of legwork if you want to become an apprentice. I do want to say, because I forgot this totally, but right now the city of Milwaukee is hiring arborists, apprentices. So if you see this before April 30th, feel free to check out their website and apply.
Thanks. Well, on behalf of LEAF and teachers everywhere, Brian, thank you for your wonderful presentation, and we're excited to get this posted. I'm sure it'll be used pretty regularly. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for coming.